appears to be an offshoot of the Mesopotamian text, which is a very controversial thing to say, but that, from a scholarly point of view, from biblical scholarship, that's, I think, accepted, that a lot of the Old Testament is built upon myths that were already sort of around in the Levant and is an evolution of Mesopotamian myth. That humans were created in the image of God. So therefore, given that they're the image of gods, you'd expect them to look very similar to us. So I don't think that's a huge leap particularly, and from my point of view, it seems a fairly commonsensical thing to say that in the same way they obviously interacted with humans, they took lovers and they had children and they created demigods and so on, that they could intermingle with us and continue their agenda and continue their fight of good and evil, which they clearly were involved in back in the day, in our modern times. And then you get quite X-Filesy about it, you see, because if you work on that assumption, then if they're not obvious characters in our world going about our business, and we've got this huge celebrity culture these days, so it wouldn't be obviously celebrity people, but if they're to say the people who organise sort of secret societies or people behind the scenes who pull the strings of the corporations and the governments and so on, then who are they? How would they leave a power? It causes all kind of questions in my mind. If they live forever, how do they continue to work amongst us without people noticing the fact they don't seem to grow old? And all of these questions, they need a sort of creative answers, and this is one of the reasons I enjoy writing these books, because you can really get into that stuff.
Well, but actually we're talking about, in essence, sort of the Wizard of Oz, that notion of who's behind the curtain, because there is in essence, according to Camelot and the research that we've done and the people we've interviewed, for example, Bob Dean, who is very much in the know in the Boys Network, behind the scenes, and that's why he comes forward and is able to reveal as much as he is and still stay alive and so on. But in essence, he talks about the ETs walking the halls of the Pentagon, which in essence are the Anunnaki. He talks about that. He and some of his good friends, one of which is Sitchin and some others, who would be known to the audience if I said their names. Basically, we're talking about sort of an in-crowd who are in the know as to the fact that there are individuals behind the scenes, not known to most of the world, but known to certain, as you say, secret societies on the inside. And so we're talking about, in other words, did they really abandon ship, so to speak, this planet, abandon their creation? On the one hand, Enki, who is the scientist, the positive, the one that wanted to keep, humanity more or less free, or at least give them as much power to become free and to grow. And then the Enlil, who wanted a lot more control. And there's the notion also, that there's also, because that war has continued, and there are many other ET races that are involved in that war, and obviously I have this new interview out with Ashiana Dean, who's talking all about that. But it's very interesting to think about. Now, there have been extinction level events on the planet. How do you deal with that, Andy?
What, with the extinction level events?
Yes. In other words, what would the Anunnaki have done during that time, in your opinion? Would they be partially responsible? Would they have gone off planet and come back? What's your theory on that?
Well, the flood event, I think Sitchin is I think you've gone to something really in terms of that having been a terrifically important event in human history, prehistory, and was something that effectively could have wiped out the humans. Now, the way I would envisage that would be that the human race would have lived as we do now, mostly, in river valleys, coastal towns, areas by the sea, or at least in low-lying areas which are fertile, which are easy to farm, easy to hunter-gather, and so on. And those areas are ripe for the kind of tsunami, extinction-level tsunami event that appears to have taken place at the end of the last ice age, approximately 13,000 years ago. Something triggered a huge catastrophe where the ice sheets that covered North America and most of Europe receded very, very quickly. And prior to that, there appears to have been some sort of catastrophic event. Now, I think I don't know whether it was because sort of the 10th planet entered the frame and caused some kind of gravitational perturbation, or whether there was just simply an event on Earth that, the catastrophic melting of the Antarctic ice cap, which just dumped a huge amount of ice into the sea, caused an immense tidal wave, this is Sitchin's idea, effectively. I think it's quite interesting. And, of course, the people who would be affected by that would be the people in low-lying communities, particularly in the Middle East and in Africa. And if something crossed the Indian Ocean, a great tsunami crossed the Indian Ocean and just swamped those lands, and then receded, then you could anticipate that event could have been very real. And the reason, potentially, why the evidence for that is not clear would then fall under the sort of ideas that Graham Hancock comes up with, which is that the pre-ice age or the pre-catastrophe ice age settlements, such that they would have been located in what was then the coast. And that coastal area would now be under the sea. So where there have been some monuments, like the one in Japan, which appear to show sort of man-made settlements, and I think out in the West Indies as well. If a more thorough explanation could be made of the seabed, then potentially more of these buried civilizations under the sea would come to light.
Well, what about, are you also, in other words, I'm kind of curious, are you talking about pole shift sort of triggered by the sun, or are you talking about something that was triggered by, in essence, the brown dwarf coming into the solar system? Is that your thought, or no?
Yeah. I think it's perfectly possible that the brown dwarf is a substantial enough entity for its magnetic field to have a fairly large effect upon the sun's own field. Now, we have to understand that the sun's field is very, very extensive. It extends out to 80 times the distance from the Earth to the sun. It's very, very vast. And like two magnets, if you move them across a table, they will affect each other. And potentially, the dark star has got also a very, very strong magnetic field, like Jupiter has got a strong magnetic field, and the dark stars won't be that much stronger. And it is potentially the case that as the dark star approaches the edging of the sun's own field, that that those two fields interact and cause a sort of a flipping of the solar pole. Not in a sort of idea of the solar pole jumping, because the sun's poles are very, very complicated. But if you like, the balance of the field within the whole solar system could have been disrupted and flipped or changed in some way, and that could have had an absolutely stunning effect upon all of the planets of the solar system, including Earth. So, if given that we live on the surface of a planet that is clearly quite fragile, it's clearly subject to great geophysical forces, something of that nature, which would be ephemeral from the sun's point of view and wouldn't necessarily be noticeable from data from the sun, but something like that, an event, could trigger sort of geophysical effects here in the form of the kind of thing that would have created the flood. But
right.
you don't necessarily.
Are you saying, that, in essence, though, that's going to happen again now?
Well, it could do, but it rather depends on where the dark star is and at what point in its orbit it is.